How about we spice things up a bit? I casually asked over dinner, not realizing I was about to throw a grenade into our marriage. Tom looked up from his steak, fork frozen mid-air, eyes wide. You mean like salsa dancing? He ventured, half hopeful, half terrified. I chuckled, swirling my wine. No, Tom, I'm thinking more. Open relationship. Boom. There it was. The bomb dropped. His face turned a shade of pale I'd never seen before, like he'd just seen a ghost, or worse, my mother naked. The days that followed were a delicate dance of planting the idea, carefully nudging it into his subconscious. Did you hear about Jack and Diane? I'd say nonchalantly, flipping through a magazine. They've never been happier since they opened things up. Each time, Tom would grunt something noncommittal, but I knew the gears were turning. One night, I brought out the big guns, research. Tom, let's look into this together, I said, laptop at the ready. He sighed but joined me on the couch. We spent hours reading articles, watching videos, and scrolling through forums. I could see the reluctance in his eyes, but also a spark of curiosity. It could work for us, I said, leaning into him. Look at all these couples who've made it work. Then came the big proposition. How about we meet someone? Just for a drink. Nothing serious, I suggested, trying to sound breezy. Remember Mark from my book club? He's nice, harmless. Tom's discomfort was almost tangible, but he nodded. All right, if it makes you happy. Meeting Mark was a roller coaster. The trendy bar we chose was loud and bustling, perfect for diffusing any awkwardness. Mark, with his charming smile and easygoing demeanor, made things almost too easy. Tom, on the other hand, was like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs, visibly conflicted but trying to be polite. As we drove home, the tension in the car was thick enough to cut with a knife. So, what did you think? I asked, trying to gauge his reaction. He's okay, Tom muttered. I could sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. Remember, this is about trust and communication, I said, trying to sound reassuring. The real kicker came when I arranged my first solo date with Mark. It's just one date, I told Tom, my heart pounding in my chest. I love you, and this won't change that. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told a different story. As I walked out the door, my mind was a whirl of excitement and dread. Was I really doing this? Was it worth the risk? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain, I was in too deep to turn back now. They say anticipation is the worst part, and as I stood in front of the mirror applying the final touches to my makeup, I realized they were right. Tom hovered near the door, trying to look supportive but failing miserably. His nervous fidgeting was almost endearing. Almost. Do you think this dress is too much? I asked, twirling slightly. The red number hugged my curves just right, but I needed to hear it from him. You look great, he mumbled, forcing a smile. Great, the universal husband response when he wants you to stop asking questions. Mark and I decided to meet in the park before dinner. When I saw him waiting by the fountain, looking every bit the charming rogue, my heart skipped a beat. We walked together, chatting about nothing and everything, until we found a secluded bench. And then, it happened. Our first kiss. It was soft, tentative at first, then passionate. A spark I hadn't felt in years lit up inside me. Dinner was a revelation. Mark opened up about his past, sharing stories of heartbreak and triumph. Each word drew me in closer, like a moth to a flame. He was vulnerable, real, and utterly captivating. I found myself hanging on his every word, completely immersed in the moment. Returning home was a stark contrast. Tom was waiting in the living room, trying to look casual but failing miserably. How was it? He asked, his voice strained. It was nice. We had dinner, talked a lot, I said, carefully editing out the intimate details. No need to poke the bear more than necessary. Tom's reaction was immediate, his face contorted with a mix of jealousy and insecurity. Nice? Just nice? The argument that followed was inevitable. He accused me of abandoning him emotionally, and I shot back that this was supposed to bring us closer. Round and round we went until we both collapsed, exhausted. Look, Tom, I love you. This is new territory for both of us, but I believe it can work. We just need to trust each other, I said, trying to inject some calm into the chaos. Despite the tension, I couldn't help but plan the next date with Mark. I promised Tom it was all for the best, that this would ultimately strengthen our marriage. He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. Mark surprised me before our second date with a gift. It was a rare book I'd mentioned in passing, something I'd given up trying to find. "How did you?" I started, genuinely touched. "I have my ways," he said with a wink. His attention to detail made me feel special, valued in a way I hadn't felt in years. The connection between us was undeniable, and each moment with him felt like a new chapter in my life. As the evening wore on, the weight of what I was doing settled heavily on my shoulders. Balancing my marriage with this affair was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. But the thrill, the excitement, and the newness of it all were intoxicating. I knew I was walking a tightrope, and the fall could be disastrous. But for now, all I could do was take one step at a time, hoping that somehow, everything would fall into place. "How about a weekend getaway?" Mark's suggestion hung in the air, tantalizing and terrifying all at once. I knew convincing Tom would be like negotiating a peace treaty. But hell, what's life without a bit of challenge? When I brought it up at dinner, Tom's fork clattered against his plate. "A weekend? Alone with him?" His voice had that edge again. "It'll be a good test of our boundaries and trust," I said, channeling my inner therapist. "Besides, you can have some time to yourself, too." After a lot of back and forth, eye rolls, and heavy sighs, he reluctantly agreed. Score 1 for diplomacy. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, far from prying eyes and the complications of daily life. The moment we arrived, I felt a rush of freedom. No neighbors, no responsibilities, just the two of us and nature. Perfect setting for a weekend of exploration. We spent hours talking, our conversations peeling back layers I didn't even know I had. Dreams, fears, and everything in between. With each word, I felt myself falling deeper into this whirlwind romance. Mark had a way of making me feel seen, like I was the only person in the world. And the physical side? Let's just say it was like lighting a match in a room full of fireworks. Every touch, every kiss, was electric. I felt alive, in a way I hadn't in years. The isolation of the cabin only intensified everything. It was like we were in our own little bubble, separate from the world and its judgments. Meanwhile, Tom spent the weekend alone. I'd call it poetic, but it felt more like a ticking time bomb. I could almost hear his thoughts spinning with doubt and jealousy. I tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on the here and now with Mark. Returning home was a splash of cold water to the face. Tom's reception was icy, his hurt and anger simmering just beneath the surface. "So, did you have fun?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It was enlightening," I said, trying to keep things light. But he wasn't having it. The argument that followed was explosive. He accused me of prioritizing Mark over our marriage, and I fired back that he agreed to this, that it was his idea too. It was a mess. We attempted to reconcile, but it was clear that the weekend away had created a rift that words alone couldn't bridge. Every time we tried to talk about it, we'd circle back to the same arguments, the same hurt. It was like being stuck in a loop, and neither of us knew how to break free. The challenge now was figuring out how to move forward. Could we rebuild from this? Was it worth it? The questions swirled around in my mind, leaving me restless and uncertain. All I knew was that things couldn't stay the way they were. Something had to change, and soon. "You can't keep this up forever," I muttered to myself as I juggled the coffee cup and my phone, trying to reply to Mark's latest message while making it seem like just another day. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Things were spiraling, and fast. Mark's involvement in my life had escalated. He wanted to see me more, and I couldn't say no. Each meeting was a rush, an escape from the mundane. We started meeting for lunch, sneaking in coffee dates, and planning late-night rendezvous. It was intoxicating but exhausting. At work, the tension was palpable. My colleagues weren't blind. The frequent absences, the dreamy looks, the constant checking of my phone, it was all adding up. Whispered conversations would stop abruptly when I entered the room. "Don't mind me," I'd say with a forced smile, but inside, my stomach churned. How long before the rumors reached my boss? Tom was no fool either. He noticed the subtle changes, the extra care I took with my appearance, the way I drifted off during conversations, the late nights that were becoming a norm. His suspicions grew with each passing day, the tension at home thickening like a dense fog. Introducing Mark to my friends was a gamble. "This is Mark," "A new friend from my book club," I said casually at a small get-together. They were charmed, of course. Mark had that effect on people. But I could see the confusion in their eyes. Why was he always around? I deflected with jokes and quick topic changes, but the unease lingered. Then came Tom's confrontation. It was a Friday night, and I'd just come back from a work dinner. He was waiting for me, arms crossed, eyes blazing. "We need to talk," he said, and I knew the storm had arrived. "What exactly is going on with you and Mark?" Caught off guard, I stammered, "It's not what you think, Tom. He's just a friend." But the words sounded hollow even to my ears. The argument was brutal. He demanded to know the extent of our involvement, and I found myself dancing around the truth, trying to protect both him and my own heart. Living a double life was tearing me apart. Balancing time between Tom and Mark was a constant struggle, each moment with one filled with thoughts of the other. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did desire. I was caught in a web of my own making, and there seemed to be no way out. The final straw came during an unexpected encounter. Tom and I were at a local cafe, trying to have a normal moment. And then Mark walked in. The air crackled with tension as they exchanged curt pleasantries. It was unbearable. I felt like the walls were closing in, each second stretching into an eternity. Tom's eyes bored into me, filled with questions and accusations. Mark's presence was a reminder of everything I was risking. I excused myself to the restroom, splashing water on my face, trying to gather my thoughts. "What are you doing?" I asked my reflection, but there was no easy answer. As I walked back out, I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The facade was cracking, and the consequences were looming. Something had to give, and soon. But for now, all I could do was navigate the storm, hoping I wouldn't lose everything in the process. "There's something I need to tell you," Mark said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. We were sitting in his car, parked at our usual spot by the lake. My heart skipped a beat. This can't be good. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "I've developed deeper feelings for you," he confessed, his eyes locking onto mine. "This isn't just a fling for me anymore. I think I love you." "Oh, great." Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, my heart did a weird flip-flop, half flattered, half panicked. This was supposed to be fun, an escape, not some grand love affair. I took a deep breath, trying to process his words. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, Tom's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He was in the shower, so I casually glanced at the screen. It was a notification from our shared cloud account. Curious, I opened it. And there they were. A series of texts between Mark and me, all laid out in damning detail. Oh, crap. Tom had seen everything. The flirty messages, the intimate details, the plans for our next rendezvous. My stomach twisted into knots as the reality of the situation hit me. When Tom came out of the shower, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, the hurt and betrayal written all over his face. "Explain this," he finally said, holding up his phone. His voice was calm, too calm, which made it all the more terrifying. I tried to explain, to justify, to rationalize, but he cut me off. "You have to end it with him, or we're done. I'm not sharing you anymore." The ultimatum hit me like a punch to the gut. The next few days were a blur of internal conflict. I was torn between the thrill and excitement of my affair with Mark and my commitment to Tom. Every time I thought about losing Tom, my heart ached. But the thought of never seeing Mark again felt equally painful. I knew I had to talk to Mark. We met at a quiet cafe, and I laid it all out. Tom found out. He gave me an ultimatum: end things with you or risk our marriage. Mark's face fell, his hurt evident. "I understand," he said quietly, though his eyes told a different story. The decision weighed heavily on me, but I knew what I had to do. My marriage to Tom was worth more than the excitement of my affair with Mark. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one. We met one last time to end things. The farewell was emotional and bittersweet. We hugged, kissed one last time, and then walked away from each other. As I watched him go, a sense of finality washed over me. This chapter of my life was closing, and I needed to focus on repairing the damage and rebuilding my marriage. Returning home that evening, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what I was losing and relief for finally making a decision. Tom and I had a long road ahead, but I was determined to make it work. For better or worse, I was ready to face the consequences of my actions and move forward. You think it's all just going to magically get better now? Tom's words echoed in my mind as I stood in the shower, water cascading over me. Sure, we'd taken the first step, but was it enough? It felt like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. Tom was relieved, no doubt about it. He was also wary, like a deer that's heard one too many gunshots. Trust wasn't going to rebuild itself overnight. We decided to start marriage counseling, a move that felt both necessary and awkward. Sitting in a sterile room, baring our souls to a stranger, just what every marriage needs, right? Our counselor, Dr. Smith, was a no-nonsense woman with a penchant for tough love. This isn't about blame, she said in our first session. It's about understanding and healing. Easier said than done. Each session was like peeling back a layer of our marriage, revealing wounds that had festered for years. Rebuilding trust was a slog. Some days were better than others. We'd have a breakthrough, then a setback, then another breakthrough. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but at least we were moving. Work became my personal hell. The gossip mill was relentless. Every sideways glance, every hushed conversation felt like a dagger. Did you hear about her and that guy? They'd whisper. It made professional life unbearable. I could feel their judgment seeping into every interaction. Dark humor became my shield. Guess I'm the office scandal now, I'd joke, forcing a smile. My friends were a mixed bag of support and judgment. Some offered a shoulder to cry on, while others couldn't hide their disapproval. I just don't understand how you could do that, one friend said, shaking her head. Social interactions became a minefield, each step fraught with the potential for emotional explosions. Mark decided to move to another city. I need a fresh start, he told me in a final text. I couldn't blame him. Our affair had left too many scars, too many memories. His departure felt like the closing of a chapter, bittersweet but necessary. Tom and I set new boundaries. No more secrets, no more lies. We created rules to safeguard our relationship, to prevent future infidelity. It was like drafting a new constitution for our marriage. We were determined to make it work, but the road ahead was uncertain. Through all this, I learned the importance of transparency. We had to communicate, really communicate, not just the surface level stuff. Our conversations were raw, honest, and sometimes painful, but they were real. One night, as we lay in bed, Tom turned to me. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice soft but resolute. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. We were both committed to the journey, no matter how rocky it might be. In the end, it wasn't about forgetting the past but learning from it. The scars would remain, but so would the lessons. Our marriage had been tested, stretched to its limits, but it hadn't broken. Not yet, and for now, that was enough. Funny how life has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it. One minute, you're the protagonist in your own scandalous drama, and the next, you're watching your husband slide into a role you know all too well. It started subtly, but then again, doesn't it always? Tom's behavior became increasingly strange. Late nights at work, hushed phone calls, and an ever-present air of distraction. It felt like déjà vu, except this time, I was on the other side of the mirror. I'd ask him how his day was, and he'd mumble something vague, eyes glued to his phone. Suspicious, much? Then there was Sarah, Tom's new colleague, a name that started cropping up more and more in our conversations. "Sarah and I are working on a project," he'd say, or, "Sarah suggested this new place for lunch." My internal alarm bells were ringing loud and clear. It didn't take long for jealousy and insecurity to sink their claws into me. I became the one scrutinizing his every move, feeling that familiar sting of betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Role reversal, indeed. Every time his phone buzzed, I felt a pang of paranoia. Was I losing him the same way he almost lost me? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, I cornered him in the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on with you and Sarah?" Tom's face went through a series of emotions: guilt, confusion, and finally, resignation. I've developed feelings for her," he admitted, avoiding my gaze. My heart felt like it had been thrown into a blender. The anger, the sadness, the sheer sense of betrayal, it all came rushing in. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. I was furious, of course, but beneath that was a deep sadness. Had we come full circle? Was this karmic payback for my own affair? I spent sleepless nights wrestling with these thoughts, feeling like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me. Then Tom dropped the bombshell. Maybe we should consider an open relationship, he suggested, echoing my own words from not too long ago. The tables had indeed turned. Now it was my turn to grapple with the idea, to weigh the pros and cons, to face the fear of losing him to someone else. It was a difficult decision. Part of me understood where he was coming from. We had both sought excitement and connection outside our marriage. But another part of me was terrified of the consequences. Could our marriage survive this new test? Or would it shatter completely? After days of agonizing reflection, I reluctantly agreed to let Tom explore his feelings for Sarah. It felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of uncertainty, but I hoped it would bring clarity to our marriage. Just be honest with me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No secrets. And so, the roles reversed. I watched as Tom navigated his own affair, feeling a mix of empathy and fear. Our marriage was once again put to the test, the stakes higher than ever. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: we were in this together, for better or worse. Ever tried watching your husband fall for someone else? Spoiler alert. It's not fun. The first time Tom came home late after spending time with Sarah, I felt a knot of anxiety twist in my gut. I tried to play it cool, but my mind was like a hamster on a wheel, running in endless circles of doubt and insecurity. Tom and Sarah were developing their own relationship dynamics. They had inside jokes, shared interests, and that spark I had once seen between Mark and me. It was like watching a rerun of my own life, except this time, I was the one left in the wings. Each time he mentioned her name, it felt like a tiny dagger to the heart. The insecurity was relentless. I found myself constantly comparing myself to Sarah. Was she prettier than me? Funnier? Smarter? It was a toxic spiral, and I knew it, but knowing didn't make it easier to stop. My self-esteem took a nosedive, and dark humor became my coping mechanism. Well, at least she hasn't stolen my Netflix password yet, I joked with a forced laugh. Then came the unexpected twist. One day, Sarah reached out to me. At first, I was wary, but curiosity got the better of me. We met for coffee, and to my surprise, we clicked. We shared our perspectives on Tom, laughed about his quirks, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were co-conspirators in this bizarre situation. Our friendship developed in the most unexpected way. Sarah was genuine, kind, and surprisingly understanding. We bonded over our mutual confusion and the emotional whirlwind Tom had unwittingly created. It was surreal, finding solace in the very person who had become the center of my husband's affection. Tom, meanwhile, was struggling with his own guilt. He hated the pain he was causing me, and it showed. One evening, he sat down beside me, eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry for putting you through this," he said softly. It was a moment of raw honesty that brought tears to my eyes. "We need to figure this out," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. In a move that could only be described as unconventional, we invited Sarah to one of our counseling sessions. Dr. Smith raised an eyebrow but didn't object. The session was intense, with emotions running high, but it was also incredibly revealing. Sarah's presence forced us to confront the reality of our situation head-on. Through counseling and open communication, we slowly began to find a new equilibrium. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like we were taking 2 steps back for every step forward. But we kept at it, determined to make sense of the chaos. Then came Sarah's decision. One afternoon, she called me, her voice steady but sad. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I don't want to come between you and Tom." Her words were bittersweet. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached at the thought of losing a friend. When Sarah ended her involvement with Tom, it felt like a door closing. But as one chapter ended, another began. Tom and I were left to rebuild, piece by piece, the trust and connection we had lost. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but we were committed to trying. Life had thrown us a curveball, and we were still standing. Maybe a little battered, a little bruised, but still standing. And for now, that was enough. Funny how hitting rock bottom can make you appreciate the climb back up. The morning light filtered through the curtains as Tom and I sat in bed, the silence between us comfortable for the first time in months. We'd been through the ringer, but here we were, still standing. Moving forward wasn't just a decision, it was a necessity. We'd seen the worst parts of each other and somehow decided we were worth the effort. Our first step? Finding new hobbies. We signed up for cooking classes, the kind where you actually learn to make fancy stuff, not just heat up leftovers. The first time Tom flambéed something without setting off the smoke alarm, I knew we were making progress. Then came hiking. Nothing like the great outdoors to remind you how small your problems are in the grand scheme of things. Each trail we conquered felt like a small victory, a testament to our resilience. The conversations we had while walking were some of the most honest and heartfelt we'd ever had. Our relationship grew stronger with each passing day. Navigating the challenges together made us realize how much we still had to offer each other. We became a team again, our bond more resilient than before. Rebuilding our social circle was a bit trickier. We distanced ourselves from those who judged, choosing instead to embrace supportive friends who understood that life is messy and forgiveness is a strength, not a weakness. It was liberating to surround ourselves with positivity. Work, however, remained a thorn in my side. The gossip had died down, but the whispers lingered. I decided it was time for a fresh start. Changing jobs wasn't easy, but it was necessary for my own sanity. Focusing on my career and personal growth gave me a new sense of purpose. One evening, Tom suggested something that took me by surprise. "Let's renew our vows," he said. At first, I thought he was joking, but the sincerity in his eyes melted my heart. We planned an intimate ceremony, just close friends and family, reaffirming our commitment to each other. It wasn't just about the vows, it was about acknowledging how far we'd come. To celebrate our renewed bond, we embarked on a long-awaited travel adventure. Exploring new places together rekindled our romance, each new destination a canvas for creating fresh memories. From the bustling streets of Tokyo to the serene beaches of Bali, we rediscovered each other in ways we hadn't imagined. As we started planning for the future, discussing goals and dreams, it felt like a new chapter was beginning. We talked about everything from career aspirations to potential family plans, the excitement of what lay ahead pulling us closer. Our next anniversary was a quiet celebration with close friends and family, a small gathering to reflect on our journey. The laughter and shared stories reminded us of the support network we'd built and the love that had seen us through the darkest times. Reflecting on the past year, we were grateful for the lessons learned. It hadn't been easy, but every challenge had strengthened our relationship. Continued growth became our mantra. We committed to maintaining open communication and trust, the pillars upon which our renewed relationship stood. Our families, initially wary, became our biggest supporters. Their happiness at seeing us stronger and more united was a source of immense comfort. They were our cheerleaders, always encouraging us to keep moving forward. Embracing this new chapter, we felt confident in our love and the resilience of our relationship. We'd weathered the storm and emerged on the other side, not just intact but stronger than ever. The future was bright, and we were ready to face it together, hand